Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie. I'm an Iowan, a Gen Xer, and a cat mom. What stereotypes have you started to form about me? Our brains are categorizing machines, constantly simplifying information, making associations, and jumping to conclusions. These mental shortcuts help us navigate the world, and they're also the basis for what we call stereotypes. In this video, I'll briefly talk about what stereotypes are, the 5 key biases behind their formation, and finally, I'll show you my favorite method for testing stereotypes to see if they actually hold up to scrutiny. Our brains organize information into mental models called schemas. These schemas act like quick reference guides, helping us make sense of new information quickly by comparing it to what we already know. For example, you have a chair schema based on your previous experiences with chairs. So when you see something new, like a weird looking chair, you don't have to start from scratch. Your chair schema already tells you it's something you can sit on. Stereotypes are a type of schema that tends to be more rigid and highly oversimplified. Whereas the chair schema is flexible and allows for variation, a stereotype applies a specific and often overly simplistic set of attributes to all members of a category, leading to assumptions that may not hold true in many cases. While we most commonly think of stereotypes as being about groups of people, like all Gen Xers are cynical, or all cat moms are introverted, they can also apply to things, topics, or even events. And here's the thing, they're not always wrong or negative. In fact, they can even be useful, like assuming a public restroom will have soap and toilet paper. The point is, schemas and stereotypes aren't just natural, but necessary. We wouldn't be able to function without them. Imagine trying to identify every single dog you see without a basic schema for dog. However, stereotypes can sometimes be inaccurate and harmful, which is why it's so important to question them. Now let's explore the 5 major thinking errors behind stereotyping. One of the most direct ways we form stereotypes is through a hasty generalization, where we jump to a broad conclusion about an entire group or category based on a very small sample. Let's say you meet an Iowan who loves corn so much that they have a corn tattoo. And so you assume that all Iowans are obsessed with corn. Okay, to be clear, I don't have a corn tattoo, but I can eat at least a half a dozen ears of corn in a sitting. In their search for patterns, sometimes our brains detect relationships between things that aren't actually linked, or overestimate the strength of a very weak connection. These illusory correlations can result in connecting traits or behaviors with groups of people. For example, if you know a cat mom who hates dogs, you might wrongly link the two. Like, I don't hate dogs, I'm just not responsible enough. Also, they're not as awesome as cats. Have you noticed how certain examples pop into your head when you're trying to figure out how common something is? That's the availability heuristic, a mental shortcut that relies on our brain's ability to find available examples. The problem is, some examples, especially those that are emotional, vivid, or recent, are more memorable than others. Let's say you've seen a viral video of a very cynical Gen Xer. Now, when you think of Gen Xers, that video pops into your head, causing you to overestimate how common cynicism is in an entire generation. My fellow Gen Xers are probably thinking, yeah, whatever, like I care. The in-group, out-group bias is the driving force behind tribalism. Us versus them. We're good, they're bad. We're right, they're wrong. We're diverse, they're all the same. This bias can actually cause us to paint entire groups with the same brush. For example, if you're not from Iowa, you might think that all Iowans are the same. But if you are an Iowan, you know we have a huge range of personalities, political views, and even favorite types of corn. And if you're an Iowan watching this, you're probably thinking, thank you. Now about those Nebraskans. Confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already think is true. While the other biases build stereotypes, confirmation bias prevents them from being dismantled by locking them in a fortress of evidence, making us feel like we're being rational and preventing us from questioning our assumptions. So if you already believe cat moms are single and obsessed with their feline overlords, you'll likely notice and remember examples that confirm your belief. For the record, this is my husband, and Lord Dimitri. The point is, these biases result in stereotypes that feel evidence-based. While we may have examples to support the stereotype, we don't realize that we might not be seeing the full picture. That's why the best way to test any idea, especially one that's prone to bias, isn't by trying to prove ourselves right, because our brain will always find a way to do that, but by actively trying to prove ourselves wrong. Okay, are you ready to learn how to test the accuracy of a stereotype? The key is to force your brain to consider the data that it would otherwise overlook. And the best way to do that is with a contingency table. To demonstrate, let's test one of the most common stereotypes levied at Gen Xers, that we're lazy slackers. Along the top is the presence or absence of the stereotype trait, and down the side is whether or not someone is part of this stereotyped group. Let's look at each of the boxes. In cell A are those examples that fit the stereotype, like a lazy Gen Xer. They're part of the group, Gen X, and they have the trait. They're lazy. These examples are the basis of the stereotype, so we tend to keep our focus here, often without realizing that we're doing it. These are the I knew it moments that make the stereotype feel true and well supported. Cell B is where we start to challenge our assumptions. Can you think of individuals who are members of this stereotyped group, but that don't fit the stereotype? Like a Gen Xer who's a hard worker. These examples directly contradict the stereotype, so we often overlook them or dismiss them as exceptions. But if we want to really test if a stereotype holds true for an entire group, it's essential to seek out and include them. Now let's consider cell C. Does the trait only exist within the stereotyped group? Can you think of individuals who have the trait, but that aren't part of the stereotyped group, such as lazy millennials or boomers? These examples weaken the idea that laziness is a unique or defining characteristic of Gen X. If the trait appears just as frequently in other groups, then the stereotype about Gen X being inherently lazy starts to fall apart. And finally, cell D helps us get a complete picture by establishing a baseline. This cell includes individuals who aren't part of the stereotyped group and don't have the trait in question. For example, by considering ambitious millennials or Gen Zers, we can see how common the opposite trait is across the general population, helping us understand the broader distribution of the trait, rather than just focusing on its presence or absence within the stereotyped group. The point is, we can't test stereotypes by relying on the same biased thinking that got us there. The key is to include all data, including, or especially, those cases that don't confirm the stereotype. That's why contingency tables are so effective. They force us to search for contradictory examples and to consider the full picture. Holding stereotypes doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human. It's part of the wiring. Mental shortcuts are a natural and necessary part of our cognitive toolkit. However, as critical thinkers, it's essential to be aware that our brains can and do make mistakes, resulting in oversimplified generalizations that aren't actually supported by evidence. And as critical thinkers, it is crucial to consciously question these assumptions, especially when they're false or harmful. By understanding how our brains form stereotypes and actively scrutinizing them, we can have a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the world and our fellow humans. And also, cats rule. Don't they, Dimitri? This is Melanie Trecek-King with Thinking is Power. Please like and subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon.